ServiceNow is on the enterprise and not allowed into OT.
Sure.
In that case, who do you think is a single source of truth? Is it the OT system or is it ServiceNow?
So that I think as you look at it, we don't say it's a single source of truth. We say that it is a unified source of truth is what ServiceNow offers. We're pulling from multiple silos. The individual silo still remains the source of truth for that data. It was discovered by those passive engines. It is contained in that environment.
This is very exciting. Hi, I'm Dale Peterson, and welcome to the Unsolicited Response Show. Joining me on this episode is James Destro. He is the head of product, manufacturing industry products at ServiceNow. Welcome to the show, James.
Thanks, Dale. It's great to be here.
Well, I'm very excited to have ServiceNow stepping into the OT industry. You are actually a sponsor at S4X22, which is exciting because I think it represents this IT-OT convergence, or as I prefer, this IT-OT integration. So I wanted to have you on the show because you also announced a new product. But maybe before we get into that, maybe take a minute or two, because I've got an OT/ICS security audience. Maybe take a minute or two and just talk about what ServiceNow does for companies.
Sure. ServiceNow is a cloud company that makes the world of work better for people, right? We are a cloud industrialized company. We're working towards moving into the verticals now. We have almost 7,000 customers, approximately 80% of the Fortune 500, and they rely on the ServiceNow platform, which is intelligent and intuitive cloud platform for successful digital transformation. So if you think of the big picture of industrialization or Industry 4.0 in manufacturing, ServiceNow is kind of a key component to that for that digital transformation. We were founded in 2004 by Fred Letty, and he had a simple yet very powerful vision, which is create a platform that let employees route work seamlessly through the entire enterprise, right? And that is essentially the foundation for everything that ServiceNow is today. We had our first successes in information technology or IT systems, and being able to manage work appropriately for that. We call that service management. And we've expanded that into many horizontal functions of customer service, human resources or HR, and security. And now we are developing industry-specific products. And last year we launched financial services and telco. And this year we're launching healthcare and manufacturing. And as we launched manufacturing just a couple of weeks ago, we announced our new product, operational technology management. It's really exciting, and this is actually the reason why I joined ServiceNow, which is I saw this need in the market as companies are starting to really get the data and the alerts from many of these systems. They get flooded by them, and they need help in being able to analyze those, solve them efficiently, and really go towards the next generation of what we call the workflow revolution.
And we'll get into some of those workflows because I think that's sort of a big term, right? Maybe we should do that now. So what kind of workflows are running through ServiceNow? Maybe give us a couple of examples.
Sure. From an IT perspective, think about all of the incidents or the challenges that you may have with your laptops or with servers or with any systems. That route, those tickets, if you will, or those incidents get routed through all of the people that need to solve the problem, all of the stakeholders that may need to do approvals, all of the representative skill sets that would be needed to solve that. And then all of that's captured into a knowledge base or a knowledge management so that the next time those issues or incidents are faced, they get solved more efficiently. That's one of the core workflows. We call that incident management. But there are many others as we start to expand, like I said, horizontally into an HR workflow. Maybe it's an employee onboarding type of workflow that needs to be achieved. Setting up with the new laptop, setting up with the new environment, giving all of the user permissions or roles, and getting associated with all of the employees and email addresses and capabilities there. As we move towards verticalization, you'll start to see things like front office or back office or middle office types of workflows. And in this case, in manufacturing, how do we optimize the work that's done inside of the factory?
hmm Okay, we'll get into that some more. I still have more questions, but let's go forward. And then when we actually talk about what OT management, maybe we'll focus on workflows that might be applicable to the OT world. So I want
Absolutely.
to cover two things in this interview. The first is I want to talk about the asset inventory, the OT asset inventory that was added as part of this OT management, what it
Right.
is, and the various ways that that information is going to get into the system and updated in ServiceNow. And then secondly, what I just mentioned, okay, great. We have the asset inventory in ServiceNow. What the heck are we supposed to do with it? Where's the big potential win for someone in going through the effort of doing that? So to begin with the first one, I saw in the videos I watched, a major part of this video was talking about the OT asset inventory that could be put into ServiceNow. And I'm going to put up a slide here for the audience, but you first began by breaking it down into 3 OT parent classes. Can you
That's right.
talk about those parent classes and why you made the decision to break it up that way?
Sure. We actually added a set of over 20 classes to cover the breadth of operational technology to ServiceNow, extending the full capabilities around the attributes, understanding the full Purdue model, the zone conduit model, so that we can associate, various capabilities there. But when it
Yeah, I mean,
came
just
to,
just just to interrupt. I guess what I was
sure,
meaning was the OT parent classes.
yes,
So
yeah,
there's
I
a
was getting.
hierarchy. There's like an OT parent class and then OT classes.
Right, right. So we then group those into the 3 superclasses. The first one of those
Okay.
is the supervisory systems, right?
hmm
Supervisory systems. Think of them as the major groups or the big components that control and reach out into the various layers. Your SCADA servers, things that are at the highest level of the Purdue model. The next set is the control systems, the detailed control
hmm
systems themselves, the PLCs, the control modules, the clients that are actually doing the physical control or actually
hmm
the algorithms around changing the way that the devices work. And then the lowest level is the devices. And the devices are directly in contact with the actual process. These are the things that directly bring in information or actually physically enact change to the process.
The last one was the most interesting, which what you're calling OT field device, because you say industrial sensors, industrial drives, industrial actuator. I'm a little wondering or curious how much information you're going to get in there that isn't manually entered, because a
Yeah.
lot of that stuff is not sitting there with an IP address. It's not making it into most of the OT asset inventory systems that are currently out there, the systems from your Clarity, Nozomi, Dragos, Radiflow, all those people. So they would be something maybe that those systems don't have visibility. How do you envision getting that type of information into ServiceNow?
Yeah, there's actually a couple of ways. One of them is integrating directly or reading the configurations from some of those operational technology systems directly. This may be an interface with a historian to understand how the tags are laid out or how the equipment model is laid out. For example, OSI's PI asset framework, for example,
Hmm.
can give us a lot of detailed information about that control layer. Integrating with Rockwell, Honeywell, ABB, others directly with their asset management layer to understand the topology of the OT systems and how they lay out. A good portion of our information does come from those operational technology security providers, the ones that you had mentioned. And that gives us a unified view or a complete view of all of the systems of record that are there.
Well, that's interesting. The vendors I mentioned are the easy wins, I can imagine, because they're already exporting a lot of this information now to Splunk, to QRadar, that sort of thing.
Right.
But are you seeing some pickup from, and you don't have to mention companies if there's nothing public yet, but are you seeing pickup from some of those types of companies you mentioned, your OSI Softs, your Rockwells, your Siemens, not the OT asset inventory, but the actual ICS components or systems? Are you seeing pickup there?
Yeah, we're seeing it's not necessarily only working with those vendors or those providers, but also our systems integrators who are configuring connections and integrations to pull the data. But the customers are really the ones that are driving. I want the complete view, is what they say. I
hmm
need to be able to see the impact of any security incident or any kind of changes that I'm going to do, I need to see the total impact of that, not just what I can discover from a passive discovery capability or even from an active discovery capability. I need to understand the entire radius of that. And from that, we've reached out from various integrations perspectives, and that's where we're seeing a lot of the data and the value come from ServiceNow being able to unify that visualization and unify that repository. We call it a configuration management database. Unify that across all of those silos and sources.
So the connectors that these people need to create, I assume there's some documentation, some API that says this is how you need to send us data. Is that a public document, or is that a ServiceNow partner document?
It's actually both. So our documentation is available on what we call the ServiceNow store. So we can go and it actually has an entire array of the pre-built connectors that already comply with those APIs and the reference material needed in order for integrations to be built. Those are available on our website.
Well, I'll have to look. Maybe you can give me the link to the page of existing integrations, and we'll include that in the show notes, because that's very interesting. Do you know of any existing integrations with the more industrial vendors? Your Rockwells, your Siemens, those people. I saw the Siemens announcement, but was that actually pulling information from Siemens OT asset inventory system or from the actual Siemens control system?
So the Siemens it's a partnership with Siemens on their security operations centers. So it's actually a partnership where we're joining together and offering managed services and extended services and domain expertise with their security operations team to go very deep. Integration with their systems is something that they bring to the table and then can provide from the ServiceNow topology. And then the overall workflow is what we provide them in terms of capabilities. And that really drives a very efficient yet synergistic relationship across them.
Yeah, I guess so. But you're talking about then not a direct connection. You're essentially the Siemens SOC and security software is pulling the information or somehow obtaining the information that then sent to ServiceNow, as opposed to the Siemens control system directly talking to ServiceNow.
Right.
Much more like the Dragos Clarity Nozomi model, where they're getting some information and forwarding it to you.
That's correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you mentioned that way. So from the control systems, from the OT asset inventories, are there any other ways that you anticipate getting data into the OT management asset inventory?
Yeah, one of the big components is actually adding context to the asset inventory itself. And what do I mean by that? I mean that we need to be able to add, how is this operational technology system actually used? Not only is it a SCADA system, or is it a historian, or is it a PLC, but it's used on this manufacturing line. And that business context or that manufacturing context has to come from another source, because the passive scanners or even the configurations themselves won't have that knowledge. And that's where integration with an ERP system or an EAM system adds a lot of value in, and when we pull this context together so that we can give a complete visibility across it. And to do that, we've added the ISA 95 compliant model to ServiceNow to understand the equipment, the processes, the configurations, how are all things connected, and then we tie the operational technology to that.
I guess, though, I would think at most, now this is obviously not true for all, but in most, the best source of that information would be in those vendor systems you talked about. They don't tend to yet have, they don't have that information in their ERP or their EAM yet, or any other configuration management database. For the most part, there are a few exceptions, a few that have gone through that work, more in the electric field where there's regulatory requirements.
Sure.
So that'll be interesting to see, but that might be the future. Let's look at the actual asset inventory. So I'm going to put up a couple of slides here. The first one is the generic, kind of the top level slide when you're looking at a parent class, and you see all the different items in that class, and you see the asset type, manufacturer, IP address, model number, description, Purdue level, which is interesting, and OT asset criticality.
Right.
The last two are interesting. Are you actually inserting those, or are you expecting to pull those from another source, or are you basing them just based on the class?
There's actually a couple of ways that we can get that information. And this is where the power of ServiceNow comes in, being able to, what we do, multi-source rationalization. So for example, if that comes in from one of the OT security providers, they may already have the Purdue level associated with it because their scanner or their appliance is set to that particular network segmentation. If it doesn't, then we can discover the context from the network layout that's actually there as well. So we understand how the network switches are configured to VLAN and understand what IP address range may come in so that we can associate it with the Purdue level. That might not be correct and therefore need an override or a manual input or an automatic classification, meaning the ones that come in through this group or category could automatically be signed zone in the zone conduit model or the Purdue level, which is a specific instance of that.
Yeah, I could imagine just programming that up. You could say, I'm going to take it if it's provided. If not, maybe look at the class and so that makes a little more sense. So you'll take it or you'll make your best guess. And if it's wrong, they're allowed to override it in the system.
Right.
Criticality is a little harder because some PLCs are critical and some are not, and they could be on the same subnet. So how are you coming up with the criticality?
Yeah, criticality is a couple of ways. So it also could come in from the source system, right? That's one of the attributes that we've received from some of those source systems as well. But we also look at it from the nature of, now we've tied this to the process model, the ISA 95 model. Users can assign various production lines and OT assets attached to them as a specific criticality. And then we get the feeds and the updates for that particular production line, we can say, this one has a higher criticality than the other. Also, as they assign zones could automatically detect what the criticality is. And again, if all else fails, then the manual override is available. One of the things we haven't talked about, which our customers take advantage of very often, is Excel as a source, right?
Yes.
And we've talked about these automated feeds, but for us, Excel is a living source. And it is a living source because that could be the system of record for a completely air-gapped environment where there is no connectivity and we can't scan in that. Therefore, they'd want to keep an Excel record up to date, but they want to import it into ServiceNow. They want it to go through the same rationalization. They want it to unify across all of their other sources, and then they want to see it in all of our visualizations and views. And so that is absolutely one of the supported connectors as one of our sources too.
Yes, we see that with OSIsoft, the Pi people. They still say a large amount of their customers put their tags in and configure their tags in their system through an Excel spreadsheet. They basically import it through one of their tools. So that makes a lot of sense. Of course, you can also do manual entry, right?
Absolutely.
If someone wants to, they can manually change things. So some of those made sense at that higher level. But then if I look a little bit further down, I see a lot of detail. So if then I click on the asset, and I'm going to show a screen here where some of the detail is shown. You talk about communications that are taking place. Like this asset is communicating with these other assets. You include a lot of other detail, lower level detail that I quite frankly haven't seen in many OT asset management systems right now. So how do you envision getting that? Is that, again, spreadsheet manual entry, or do you have something else in mind?
So again, this is a combination. This is really where the value comes from ServiceNow multi-source. For some of that information, such as installed software, operating systems which ServiceNow uses or leverages from the IT landscape, if it's a Windows, for example, or Linux or others, we have discovery agents that can look at all of the configuration on Windows in a more active sense than a passive discovery appliance can, right? That allows us to then pull in the configuration and the detailed system configuration more than just what's been communicated over the wire. And that's where a lot of that information would come from. We also have an agent-based. So if you don't want to reach out and actually touch the system or grab the system from an active perspective, you can install our local agent on the system itself, and it can find more information than, again, a passive scanning tool can. We integrate that all together. We unify the record across what the passive engine has, what Excel has, what our active engine has, what our agent engine has, again, to give you that one source of truth of what that is. And then that allows for the management of all of those capabilities and all of the details.
So this is where it gets a little interesting. This source of truth, this single source of truth idea. We've got systems in OT right now that are dealing with a lot of the workflows, are storing information and asset inventory and such. And then we have ServiceNow. Now, if ServiceNow, let's look at both cases. One where ServiceNow is on the enterprise and not allowed into OT.
Sure.
In that case, who do you think is a single source of truth? Is it the OT system or is it ServiceNow?
So that, I think as you look at it, we don't say it's a single source of truth. We say that it is a unified source of truth is what ServiceNow offers. We're pulling from multiple silos. The individual silo still remains the source of truth for that data. It was discovered by those passive engines. It is contained in that environment. As you want to add more information to it, ServiceNow then becomes the unified source of truth or the overriding source of truth. Maybe you're correcting information, or maybe you don't have that piece of information. As soon as you create it and manually override it in ServiceNow, we become that source of truth for the corrected information. But it's not necessarily the discovered source. It's we call that the unified source that sits on top.
I like that term. It might just be glossing over some potential conflicts, though. So, for example, or maybe you can set this in ServiceNow. Can you prevent overrides in ServiceNow? Can you say, let's say for this set of assets, whatever comes from OT, that's it. You can't override it?
That's correct. We actually have, based on each class, can have each set of attributes defined with a priority, so that this discovery source has the highest priority, and therefore it is this source of truth for that set of attributes for this class. And we can also make it to where you can't change these attributes that come in from that specific source. And all of that is configurable from the ServiceNow perspective.
You gave this explanation about active probing from ServiceNow to these assets, potentially agents on probably the more computer-based assets.
That's right.
Probably not yet for the PLCs and anything running in real time or something like that. So that means you envision ServiceNow being at some point down in layer 2 or level 2 of the Purdue model. Is that correct?
Yeah, at least level 3, right? And some of the systems at level 2. Yes, it's where they are configured and actually running on an IT-based system. Maybe it's a VM, maybe it's a Windows server, maybe it's Linux server. Things that ServiceNow, we do that day and night in the IT environment of finding those systems, looking at all of the topology, all of the Windows services that are running on them, understanding the health of that core piece of it, right? And then the OT system sits on top of that core operating system or that core framework. And that's where the marriage of the data coming together and managing it as a unified system really provides a lot of value.
You're going to get a lot of pushback there. I'm sure you're already seeing some. For a long time, people were only doing passive only, even though active was much more effective. And a lot of people mistook active for being, let's say, vulnerability scanning with a Nessus scanner or a Rapid7 scanner or something like that, as opposed to authorized legitimate commands via PowerShell, WMI, something like that. So the industry is still adapting to that reality. But we are seeing active in other products in the system, and it's much more accurate. It's much more efficient. So I would expect that to happen. I guess the challenge would be almost more of a cultural issue in that the ServiceNow team is going to need to convince the OT team that they need to be allowed into their environment. A lot of the active today have been OT-focused professionals convincing OT focused asset owners to allow them on OT.
Right.
How do you plan on bridging that cultural divide and actually convincing them to do this?
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. And it really comes from kind of the value that gets created by having that more detailed information, right? As you start to look at what can be provided from the passive scan is limited. And when you want to take the complete view or the holistic view of the asset itself, you need to be able to do more than that. And all of these are optional. All these components are optional to the solution. So we can work on the base foundation of just the passive scans, the data that we import. But we have several customers that want to do full lifecycle management, understanding, kind of the end-to-end workflow of how do I procure, how do I understand the life cycle, and then finally disposition this asset. Look at the overall cost. Look at the software installed, the licenses for that software installed, and that overall cost. Not you don't get all of the information enough from just a passive scan. You need to be able to get more details of what's installed, how it's configured, and what's running on it.
Okay, let's shift. Let's shift now to the second part. So we have the system in place. All this information is in ServiceNow. Let's talk about the wins. What potentially could an asset owner get from this? And maybe start out with, you might not be old enough, but when computers were just starting, there was always this concept of the killer app. There was some application or some use case that was going to just drive adoption of this new thing because the benefits were so overwhelming and so easily understood. Yeah. What would be the equivalent killer app for OT of going through the effort to integrate ServiceNow, in your opinion?
Yeah, so we're really starting to see a pull around security operations for operational technology, right? Getting the inventory is the foundation for everything, but the next step is securing the devices, understanding the vulnerabilities, understanding when a security incident happens. Those are foundational coming into ServiceNow, but then building workflow. How do I respond to these vulnerabilities? How do I do proactive management in terms of when, how, what's the risk associated with this, and what's the impact of that potential vulnerability happening? Some of the recent events that we've seen, around some of the recent attacks and or recent conclusions were, they took a hammer when instead of a scalpel to some of these events. I have to shut down everything because I don't have visibility. I don't understand the impact radius, or I'm not sure what could happen, and therefore they take the overall approach to the most conservative thing that they can. So visibility, then planning out that vulnerability response for proactive, and then having a very cohesive security incident response plan. What happens if this event occurs? What do I do about it? How do I segment my network and or proactively or reactively adapt to the situations that's happening based on the information I have from visibility perspective, but also the impact or the potential hops that this incident could take.
Interesting. So I want to talk about change management, because to me that was your killer app. But you brought something up there at the end that no. Well, a lot of what you talked about was change management in terms of vulnerability. Sure. I mean, obviously, whether I apply the patch, who has to approve the patch, who applies the patch, creating tickets for that whole process. So I want to talk about that, but I don't want to lose this one thread, because I hadn't thought about this, but you said if I heard you right, you could put the incident response workflow and potentially even incident response playbooks into ServiceNow. So if something happens, these tickets get generated for these people and this action gets taken, and that whole workflow gets put into ServiceNow. Is that a common use case in the enterprise?
Absolutely. That's part of the SOAR process, right? Understanding security operations and when security incidents take place on the IT environment is one of our core products, right? As I talked about, extending horizontally, security coming from vulnerability, security incident, threat intelligence, and overall configuration compliance is really the package that brings those all together. And what we've done is extended that into operational technology across all four of those threads.
Okay, interesting. That is an interesting use case. The change management, though, to me, it's such an important issue all over the place. But in OT, it really is because of the potential consequences of something as simple as the wrong tags being put into the wrong address spaces in a PLC. I mean, we have actually seen accidentally someone forget to rescan a database in New Jersey and a transformer explode. Just dumb luck, no cyber attack, just the change wasn't, basically the system wasn't changed when the logic was changed, and they conflicted, and it caused this bad thing to happen. So change management is a lot more than just applying patches. And in your description, or in one of the videos, I actually saw that they were talking about potentially using ServiceNow for logic changes, tag changes, all sorts of change management, and essentially it becoming the change management system for an OT environment, regardless of the change. Is that a use case that you actually see? Do you see engineers, technicians logging into ServiceNow and creating tickets and saying, I finished this ticket? Is this something you expect to happen in the future?
Absolutely. As you see the workflow revolution, it's beyond the engineer, right? We see change management across OT and the systems in manufacturing, whether it be physical system, work order changes, types of maintenance events, product quality issues. All of those can go through a change management system, or what we call a service management, end to end. That's incidents, that's problems, that's requests and changes. Those are the four major categories of what we call service management. Security is the first of those changes, right? As you look toward how do you apply a patch, how do you proactively address a vulnerability? Maybe that's we just change a firewall setting or switch a controller to manual mode, right? To reduce the risk that's associated with it. But overall, the understanding changes and understanding when a tag configuration changes, that could have impact to the engineering, impact to the calculations that are done for KPIs all the way up the chain. It could have impact to control, right? All of those features need to be considered as we look at how that process is enacted, which system that change gets actually made in, and accounting for what we call knowledge management. It's one thing to make the change once, but these are recurring processes. How do you capture the information and the knowledge of what was done? What is the best practice, so that next time our system learns and automatically recommends what the next best action to take is on a change or on an incident that's been raised?
I know there's probably, I can understand the value proposition here. Change management is something that I see a lot of asset owners struggle with in the OT world. Either it takes a tremendous amount of time if they're trying to do it. Those weekly change management meetings can be absolutely brutal if you have to sit through them and go through the cases over and over again. And some people make a lot of changes and just kind of punt on it and do it informally. I guess, what are your expectations on the asset owners from an OT perspective? So if we look at the OT community and an asset owner, do you expect the value to be understood and perceived more by someone who's doing change management and struggling with it, or someone who is not doing change management?
Oh, that's a good question. I think both, right? That's probably a cheap answer. Sorry. I would say it's probably a bigger opportunity for the ones that aren't doing change management, right? That don't have a formalized process, because the risk that's there, as well as the unmanaged or the uncaptured changes, right? Those present probably the biggest opportunity for what I'll call a unified process might offer them. And this is where, the biggest advantages will be seen. But we understand that change management on OT isn't the same as change management in IT. Our IT change management is pretty robust. It is, a very, very robust end-to-end workflow around approvals and notifications. As we look towards OT, we look towards mobile type of environments where changes need to be captured on the fly, on the move, and enabling that workforce to do it in next to or in the systems that they're working on. And that's not typical for an IT environment. And so we need to we need to change and unify our user experience to match the new operator or the new user that we're trying to approach with OT change management.
It's interesting, and the market will tell. That's the beauty of these sorts of things. You can make these predictions, and in 3 years, you'll know what the reality is. But I would see someone not doing change management as, I'd agree with you, they might have the potential benefit, or they might have the greatest benefit, right? They're doing nothing today. They do something, they can get the best benefit to whatever degree they determine requires change management, right? Just because you do change management doesn't mean you have to run every change through change management. You can say these classes of changes require you to go through this process. And you probably have even different workflows for different levels of processes if it's like any other change management system. The problem with those people is they're spending nothing on change management now. And to them, it looks like this gigantic bureaucracy and cost that most people there probably don't think they need it, or they would already have it. So that would almost have to be pushed down on them. The ones that have change management and are struggling with it with all these long meetings and such already are getting some benefits, but they're feeling a lot of pain. So there you might be able to ease their pain a little bit by making it just simpler and less meeting intensive to do such things. So we'll have to see how the pickup is on this. I mean, do you have any last thoughts on that as to where you expect your early wins on this?
Yeah, I think the efficiency gain of those that exist or have existing change management processes, that's definitely the target there. And it would be the availability gain for those that don't have the change management process. So I think, but it will be a bigger effort and a bigger lift to actually implement those. And I agree, definitely the prioritization of either the higher risk or the more involved changes should be the first ones to approach. And it isn't an all or none, right? It's definitely a spectrum of how you implement over time and grow those procedures and processes, for
sure. So that led into a question I had here, because in your press release, it said one of the benefits was availability, avoid downtime, and improve response and recovery with workflows and change management processes designed for the OT systems. So you're saying there that just because you have better change management or better control of what's done and how the assets are managed, you're going to avoid downtime because of that?
That's one factor, correct. Change management is one. But the second part of the workflows is incident management and problem management. And if I can expand on those, incident management means there's something wrong with the system. It may not be available now. And our workflows will help you solve that problem faster, right? Like we talked about, capturing the knowledge of how you've solved it previously, having those knowledge articles available, having recommendations of the steps to take to solve the problem available at the touch of your button or at touch of, at your fingertip. That's where we start to see the incident time shrink, which increases the availability. Problem management is where I see this problem or this incident occurring over and over. How do I do a root cause analysis so that it doesn't happen again? Now that it's not happening again, we see the availability because the issue is not reoccurring. So across those three elements, right? Change, obviously we do change better. We have the reduced risk for downtime. Reduction of how do I respond or recover from an incident because I have best practices in my workflow. And then finally, how do I address the root cause so that these issues stop reoccurring?
I guess the last area I wanted to touch on is if this would make sense, are you viewing this as a solution for an extension for people that have ServiceNow? So if I have ServiceNow in the enterprise, obviously adding OT management becomes somewhat attractive. Certainly from a metrics control standpoint, I know the executives that have responsibility for everything, OT and IT, would care about that. But what about someone who doesn't have ServiceNow? Do you expect anyone to say, I'm going to put ServiceNow in for OT management, or is this more of just an add-on solution?
That's a good question. I think what we're seeing, and the biggest pull is obviously from customers of ServiceNow. It's the easiest entrance for us and the easiest value proposition. We give you visibility across all of your technology end to end, IT to OT, right? Now we have full visibility to all the assets. We have the appropriate security roles, how you want to segregate it, how you want to do it. And you can apply best practices in change management and incident management from both sides, one to the other, and see the ease of gaining value across the board. However, we actually do have some newer customers who are looking at OT management. I need to get the best value I can, and security incidents are starting to crop up a lot more on this critical infrastructure. And because of that, they're starting to evaluate ServiceNow as a unified visualization and workflow tool to help them solve those problems. But a bulk of them, in fact, most of our engagements are occurring on existing ServiceNow.
Yeah, it's funny. I was just thinking of some asset owners I know pretty well that have 50 or 100 sites that they need to deal with, and they don't get along with IT. And I could see them actually saying, "Hey, let's the enterprise, the corporate, the IT folks have selected this other solution. Let's select ServiceNow. That way, they can't ever look at our stuff." So you might get some shadow OT people who get your product. Well, I really appreciate you coming on. Is there something about either what you're doing now, or is there some future direction that you see this ServiceNow offering going that you want to leave the audience with before we sign off?
Sure. I think as you know, we've touched on operational technology, the asset visibility and the inventory being kind of foundational. We touched on security, and we touched on the change management perspectives. That's the initial solution. That's what we have, and it's ready to go. As you look towards an overall risk view, backup continuity or business continuity management perspective, as you look at how operational technology impacts the entire workflow and the supply chain and the value chain inside of manufacturing, and you look at the end-to-end asset management for operational technology, again, the hardware perspectives and the software perspective, you get a full and a holistic view of operational technology. And so we see those areas, what we call global governance, risk, and compliance, and asset management being the next hot topics for operational technology.
Yeah, we haven't even talked about it. We could get into other areas. For example, I would imagine you could pull out some pretty interesting metrics that your executives and your leadership would want to see out of this tool if you had such things: ticket times, vulnerability status, all sorts of things like that. And then we haven't talked about, and it'd probably be a rabbit hole we don't have time to go down, but we haven't talked about the fact that then we've been talking about information coming in to ServiceNow, but then you also connect into things like SCCM. So you can say, oh, we need to generate this ticket to have this thing patched, and you can send the information to other tools as well. So sort of the other side, the export side of this information, there's all those connectors too. So I think it's something that we need to get smarter on, whether it's ServiceNow or one of your competitors or anyone else in the industry. We're going to see more of this trend of these tools being combined or integrated at least. So I appreciate you coming on and sharing this with you. Good luck. We'll link to that page with the connections and a few of these slides and other things. But thanks again for coming on the show.
Great. Thanks, Dale.